Can fasting or dieting without food for extended periods of time reverse diabetes and insulin resistance? Fasting has to be done right from day one or not done at all, because it can end in failure, eventually making one's health worse. We will cover the common mistakes made, along with reviewing new studies which do show unfavorable results. Knowing why these studies had disappointing outcomes will help you understand where fasting fits as part of a lifestyle change. Finally, I will explain how fasting is used as part of a game plan to keep me lean and muscular, but most importantly, the role it plays in leveraging insulin sensitivity for maintaining an A1C of 5 and under. Before we get started, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that gray notification bell. And if you have learned something new today, please hit that like button for me. When health claims are made, someone will always cash in books, supplement lines, endorsements, which eventually lead to fame and fortune, especially for those willing to leverage your sickness against you. Individuals and institutions are there to profit off complicated diseases like diabetes. The worse your health becomes, the more money they make off you. Always remember that. The fasting craze is not immune, especially now with all these new questionable marketing claims. It has made many believe this is the shortcut to success. It's all based around the idea of our ancient hunter-gatherers who didn't have supermarkets, refrigerators, or food available year-round. At times, they couldn't even find anything to eat. As a result, us humans have evolved to be able to function without food for extended periods of time. Now, on a side note, I personally had an autoimmune attack which led to my late onset type 1 insulin-dependent diabetic diagnosis. But I fear what is known as double diabetes. That is where a type 1 develops insulin resistance, essentially also becoming a type 2 diabetic. When I was first diagnosed around 8 years ago or so, I went ahead and began treating myself the way my ill-informed, extremely outdated university nutrition dietetic program taught me to. That is, it called for a diet using quote-unquote healthy, good carbs like oatmeal, brown rice, yams in every meal, including snacks. And then I would magically have to match my insulin doses throughout the day. This little experiment caused my insulin requirements to double or even triple over time. I suffered not only extreme highs and debilitating lows, but blood sugar control was impossible. My health markers like my cholesterol, triglycerides, and blood pressure, they went through the roof. This madness, it had to end. Everyone around me would now start to profit off my worsening health. I knew objectively, based on the latest research, if I could not get my insulin doses down and at the same time achieve an A1C of 5 and under, I was going to suffer some inevitable consequences, including a shorter lifespan. I first and foremost adjusted my diet to what makes logical sense, and at the same time, I also continue to leverage fasting, not only as a tool to help keep me very muscular and lean, which then leads to that A1C of 5 and under, but if done correctly, increases insulin sensitivity for the rest of the day. This minimizes the doses of insulin needed, and to be objective, it's now a fourth of what is recommended on a daily basis. In order to grasp the true limitations of fasting. And this is where most make their biggest mistake. You must first understand how insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, occurs in the first place. If you cannot answer why one becomes a diabetic, you will not be able to see the big picture of how fasting really works. The big discovery, which came a few years ago, one develops metabolic diseases like diabetes not based on how much body fat they have, but where that stored fat is located. As one continues to eat excessive carbohydrates day in, day out, whether it's whole grains, brown rice, candy, sodas, or even junk food, our livers take all those excessive carbohydrates and convert them into triglycerides. These triglycerides, or basically fats, are then called to be stored temporarily in our fat cells under the skin. Our human bodies were historically designed to have a buffer of body fat to occur, but for short periods of time, as then they would get burned off in an ebb and flow of life. We, as a species, have never eaten 3 to 4 structured meals a day, and then we're instructed to snack in between those meals, constantly eating carbs and excessive calories around the clock 7 days a week. So simply put, we are getting fatter. Knowing that, the next question is, who is storing fat through a process called hypertrophy, and who is storing fat through a process called hyperplasia? Hypertrophy is when each individual fat cell just gets bigger and bigger, but the number of fat cells does not change. Think of it like blowing up a single balloon. On the other hand, some genetically have fat cells that grow through hyperplasia, and this is where the fat cells may get a little big, but before it gets too big, it simply just splits in half and makes new baby fat cells to store all that extra energy coming in. If someone is blessed through genetics with fat cells that simply split and make new cells, the potential to get fat is almost limitless. They can continue to get fatter and fatter subcutaneously, that is, the belly fat that can be pinched directly under the skin. Now, that person, ironically, as they're gaining fat, they can also stay insulin sensitive. So even if they're overweight or even obese, they do not become diabetic. And that's because their fat cells always have more room to store fat because new fat cells are created. On the other side, as fat cells grow bigger and bigger in those who cannot grow new fat cells, they eventually become insulin resistant. This is done as a survival mechanism to prevent the cells from exploding or bursting. But in the process to save itself when completely full, rather than exploding, it has to start leaking out its stored free fatty acids back into the bloodstream. And at the same time, it also starts producing pro-inflammatory proteins to protect itself. Those free fatty acids released back into the bloodstream have to be stored and end up somewhere. And where is that somewhere? In between all of the body organs, also known as visceral fat, within that liver, and unfortunately also inside our precious muscle tissue. Why? Because there's nowhere else for the floating fats to go. It is this toxic fat stored in all the wrong places that creates insulin resistance, meaning the insulin that is produced by the pancreas has less and less of an effect at lowering blood sugars. So your pancreas then in turn has to produce more and more insulin, eventually damaging and burning out its own beta cells. So now you know why someone can be of normal weight or even look fit but still have type 2 diabetes. It's not the fat under the skin that is the problem, but is the fat buried deep within the body, the one that cannot be pinched, that is deadly. By now, many of you are starting to see the important point to all of this. The big picture. If one introduces lifestyle changes like fasting to reverse diabetes, then we have to ask 4 very important questions. First, does this change help remove all those toxic fats buried deep in the body? Second, can it dampen inflammation, allowing the pancreas to reduce its workload of insulin production? Third, and just as importantly for us diabetics, does this change impact muscle tissue loss or gain? Why is it so important? Because it is that muscle tissue that soaks up or brings all of that floating sugars in the bloodstream that's present after a meal. The less muscle one has, the smaller amounts of glucose one can store. The end result, uncontrollable high blood sugars and an elevated A1C. Let's talk about a few studies, and then we'll put this all together for you. In one very important mouse study, Australian researchers mapped out what happens behind the scenes in fat tissues during intermittent fasting, where no food is consumed on alternate days. It showed fasting triggers a cascade of dramatic changes depending on the type of fat deposits and where they're located around the body. You may be asking, why use a mouse model? Because it's a useful analog ahead of human studies. A mouse's metabolism is actually much faster, allowing researchers to observe changes a little more rapidly. Plus, they get to examine body tissues, which is very difficult to do to sample in humans. This study discovered 2 things. First, the unhealthy visceral fat was found to go into preservation mode, adapting over time, becoming more resistant during fasting. Second, and this is devastating, both visceral fat and subcutaneous fat increased their ability to store fat during those fasting breaks. In other words, once those fat stores have been built, it acts like another independent organism that has its own survival mechanism in place. This study highlights the number 1 rule when it comes to fasting and why most fail. It is not the time periods you choose to fast that matters at all. Whether it's 24 hours, 12 hours, or even 8 hours, what critically matters is what you choose to eat when you break that fast. That stored body fat that was burned during the fast can easily be put on even if you had just 1 meal in the day, especially if it's a very calorie-rich, high-carb, high-fat meal. The unfortunate result? Fasting can become a glorified binge and purge fest, destroying your relationship with food. The point is to always flatten the insulin curve, not to spike it. The vast majority of studies do show that if fasting is not done correctly, most will eventually regain all of their weight, plus more in certain instances. And that is because metabolic rate is directly related to body weight. Since you weigh less after fasting or dieting, your metabolism is slower, so you regain all the weight when normal eating is resumed. For example, in this study, 22 women were divided into 3 groups, all of which ate meals Monday through Fridays at a research unit for 4 weeks. During the first week, all 3 groups ate all they wanted. Then on each of the following Mondays, one group was chosen to fast. The second group only consumed 1,200 calories, and the third was to eat unrestrained or anything they wanted. For the rest of the week, All the women were free to eat as they liked. During each session, participants were weighed and all food consumed was measured. For the two groups who fasted or ate the restricted 1,200 calories on Monday, body weight declined significantly on the following day, though it did not change for the unrestrained eaters. By the end of the week, both the fasters and the dieters had regained all of their lost weight, even though they did not increase food consumption beyond normal levels. But this is the important discovery. Even though weight was regained, not all their vital tissues like bone and muscle returned to normal. In the second study, which comes close to my heart because it involves exercise and fasting, is a new meta-analysis where they wanted to determine the acute effects of both fasted and fed exercise on energy intake, energy expenditure, subjective hunger, and gastrointestinal hormonal release. When really well done studies like this have their subjects fast, but then they closely control energy intake over the course of the entire day, they show no differences in fat loss. What really matters again is not the time under fasting, but what you eat when that fast ends. Second, regardless of what many of the cronies or experts are saying, fasting does not, let me repeat this, fasting does not boost your metabolism. Diving deeper into this, the ones who fail with intermittent fasting are making a few but common mistakes. You always have to remember, when you fast or you eat less than what you need, you will lose weight. Your body then goes into starvation mode. To save energy, your metabolism slows. And what's critical to understand, muscle tissue gets used to fuel the body. The severity of the protein and energy restriction determines the amounts of muscle tissue that gets lost. And for most, when muscle is gone, it is gone for good. You do not get it back. The only way, and I'll say it again, the only way of getting muscle tissue back is by refocusing on increased protein intake and by adding in exercise, especially weight training or resistance training. On a positive note, we can cover one very small study where they found fasting can reverse type 2 diabetes. 3 people with diabetes followed a diet program of 3 fasts each week for several months. They would eat only dinner on the days they fasted and then lunch and dinner on the days they didn't fast, focusing in on, and here's the key to the whole thing, low carbohydrate, high protein meals. 2 people in the study were able to stop taking all of their diabetic medications, and the third stopped 3 out of the 4 of the medications. Within 1 to 3 weeks, all 3 could stop taking insulin. They lost between 10 to 18% of their body weight, or 20 to 23 pounds. Even though this was a very small study, it provided the first real clue as to the importance of which lifestyle choices matter the most. The most important by far is that diet choice. In fact, study after study have shown that the low carb, high protein diets are the most effective way at reducing those deadly visceral fat stores, and at the same time helps maintain all of that precious muscle tissue. Eating more protein also fends off hunger. In the episode, The Most Important Nutrient for Diabetics, which I will put in the description box if you've missed it, I discussed the protein leverage hypothesis. It predicts we as humans will always prioritize protein first when regulating total food intake. The real world implications is that if we don't consume enough adequate protein, we will overconsume other foods high in carbohydrates and or fats in a subconscious effort to try and obtain more of those critical missing amino acids. Fundamental law number 1. If you do not have enough high quality protein in that meal you end the fast with, you are doomed to fail. The next question we should ask: where does fasting fit in the hierarchy of lifestyle changes, especially for us diabetics? Making that right diet choice is first and foremost. That is followed by exercise to help maintain and build that muscle and to directly burn off that visceral fat. Third in the equation is then fasting. And how do I leverage fasting? I will do fasted cardio first thing in the morning on my treadmill 6 days a week for around 30 to 40 minutes. And we're talking a brisk walk here. I will wait to eat 3 to 4 hours and then I will have my lunch. And that first meal is always a high protein, low carbohydrate meal. This increases insulin sensitivity like you would not believe. Then later in the day, after my intensive weight training session, I will also throw in another small little mini fast by staying fasted for about an hour and a half after I've trained before I eat. That is to help keep my body in that fat burning mode. Then again, that dinner is focused around a protein rich meal. If you are new to fasting, take it one step at a time. If you have no experience with pushing your meals forward, you will find yourself feeling miserable. And that is where the binge eating at the end of the day will become a problem. This will not only stall weight loss, but it'll also mess up your relationship with food. Track your schedule and hunger patterns to find out the best approaches based on your lifestyle. If you prefer eating earlier in the day, or if your lifestyle demands you to, feel free to schedule your feeding window in a way that allows you to start eating in the morning and then stop eating earlier in the evening. But whichever method you choose, make sure that meal that breaks that fast has an oversized serving of high quality protein. Always remember our number one rule as resilient diabetics: let thy food be your medicine. Good food is medicine. Bad food will need you to take more and more medicine. I bet many of you have additional questions like: how much protein does a diabetic need per day? What are the best kinds of protein? Because they are not all equal. I will expose the deceit and the misunderstandings doctors and nutritionists are taught to this very day about this vital macronutrient. The first link you will see is to subscribe to this all-important life-changing channel. The second is the link to the playlist on protein. So, have a great and productive day, and we will see you soon with another new episode, which are generally released bi-monthly. Bye for now.